So you want to be the Dungeon Master and you need to know what it takes? In this video, I got top 10 checklists for what you need to run your very own game. Coming up. Welcome to the Dungeon Coach. I'm the Dungeon Coach. I'm here to help you lower that DC in your game. This is the second video in a two-part series for DMs. This video focuses on the mechanics of actually running a game, and my first video helps you create your own campaign. So watch that video to get your story ready, but this video is to get you ready. Here's the list: the role of the Dungeon Master, the rules of the game, combat, social encounters, exploration, how to handle things like rest, narration, and pacing, running your game, and what resources do you need to actually play. DMing is a huge topic. Each of these points will get their own video, and over time, I'll have all of them linked down in the description and in the pop-up cards right here. So let's get into it. Number one, the role of the DM. These are things you have to accept when taking on the mantle of the Dungeon Master. Now, it is a lot to take on, but I absolutely love it and wouldn't want it any other way. So what does it mean? You are another player at the table, but you have to step up and be the leader of the group. You lead the discussion on when and where to play, you keep your players organized, and you manage conflicts in and out of the game. You'll put in more time than any other player by a long shot. For a 3-hour session, you might spend 6 hours preparing or more at first, but that's where I'm here to help bring that number down. And keep in mind, as a DM, it's not you versus them. I want my players to know that I'm rooting for them, and I'm just the referee and the judge. One of the biggest things here is know your rules. Even if you're at a table of all brand new players, it's on you to know the rules the best. The game can get really confusing if nobody knows how the rules are and you have to open the book all the time. This is one of the many things that leads to them respecting you as the game master, because when a rule comes up, you have the final call. And every Dungeon Master's interpretation of the rules is different, and that's fine. Just be fair and consistent. And a huge coaching tip here is don't get too wrapped up in the rules. When there's a disagreement at the table about a rule, you step up and make the final call and move on. Talk about it after the game if you need to. And don't let the rules slow your game down and everybody's checking the book every 5 minutes. Make up something and go with it. To help tackle all these rules, your best bet is get the starter kit, which comes with a starter kit rulebook just for new DMs. It also has an entire adventure inside that you can use. But I talk about all this in part 1 of this video. And you at least need to get comfortable with the player's handbook. It could be intimidating to have to read through this whole thing, but really chapters 1 through 5 are about character creation. I'll have a video down in the description about how I do character creation that should help you out. But really you need to focus on chapters 7, 8, and 9 as the DM. And then of course there's the Dungeon Master's Guide that can really help you wrap your head around this large skill. You can find copies online, but I recommend getting a hard copy. And speaking of rules, number 2 is rules. Here's a real simple rundown of some things you and your players need to know.
The D20 is what you'll be using for almost all of your rolls. All these dice ever do are for damage.
So what do you add to this D20? It helps to know where the modifier comes from.
Here's an example character sheet that only has the ability score modifiers and the proficiency bonus. To figure out what to add to this roll, just think about what ability you're using and if you're proficient at it or not. Rolling for initiative is the same thing as a dexterity check, which is why it's the same number.
So some examples here. If a player swings their huge greatsword, that would use strength as their modifier, and they would be proficient at using their own weapon. Add those two together, that would be your modifier for your attack roll. To make it a little bit more difficult now, if that same player picks up a random chair and hits somebody with it, what do you do then? You would still use that same strength modifier, but they're not proficient at wielding a chair, so you would only add the strength modifier. Here's a little bit more difficult scenario. Your players are walking through town looking for an NPC. This could be a secret contact or a popular blacksmith in town. What would you make them roll? There are many ways you could do this, and like I said, every DM's different. And you might not even make them roll for this, but here are some different ways you could make up a roll.
You could have them make an intelligence or an investigation check to see if they're smart enough to dig through the town and find them. And if they're not proficient, that would just still be a +3. You could have them make a wisdom or a perception check to see if they could look around and if they were observant enough to find out where it was. And they are proficient, so that would be 4 + 2 is where the +6 would come from. Or if they want to use their social skills with charisma or maybe even a persuasion check, they could do that as well. They could ask around and see if anybody knows.
Now as the DM, you're going to be asking your players to make a lot of rolls. They only ever really fit into 4 categories: attack rolls, skill checks, saving throws, and contests. Attack rolls are pretty simple. Ask for those when they attack. Skill checks can be intimidating because there's so many of them, but just make sure you understand the difference between each and ask for whichever one feels right. Saving throws are very similar to skill checks. Usually they're combat oriented and they're a lot more high stakes. And the last one's a contest, which is the most unique of the four, but it's when two people are opposing each other trying to do the same thing. You can think of these like a double skill check. Each would make a skill check and see which one is better. Two people standing on opposite sides of a door trying to push it in, strength contest. Two people in a game of tag, dexterity or an acrobatics contest. Who can eat the most food? Constitution contest. A test to see who's smarter? Intelligence contest. Who can find Waldo? Perception contest. Contests towards the same thing can also be two different skill checks. If you're trying to lie to an NPC to get them to believe you, you would make a deception check and the NPC would make an insight check. Whichever one's higher wins. A big thing you're going to have to do as the DM is set a DC. I don't mean dungeon coach, I mean a difficulty class. Once you ask a player to make a skill check, you have to come up with a DC for what would succeed or not. Keep in mind that level 1 players will have a modifier of about +3 to 6 on something that they're considered good at. A simple way I do it is think of a DC in increments of 5. A DC of 5 would be something that's extremely easy to do, and I probably wouldn't even ask for a roll for it. A DC of 10 would be something of average difficulty that if you're good at it, you'll probably be able to do it. A DC of 15 would be a little bit more challenging thing to do, and you'd probably only be able to do it if you're good at that type of thing. A DC of 20 would be something extremely hard to do, if not almost impossible for some people. And I do throw out DCs of 25 and 30, but those are next to impossible. Unless you're level 20, then that's not hard at all. Your DCs don't have to go exactly by 5, but I really like how clean and simple this makes it. So a lot of this is based off of what makes sense and what feels right. Whenever your player describes what they do, what kind of check would you ask for? And when you set the DC, about how hard would it be? So don't overthink it and trust your gut. The last thing here is to know your player's class mechanics. You can help your new players with the mechanics of their class and help them understand it better. And you can know what your party's capable of when you think about combat encounters or puzzles. Which brings us to number 3, combat. Combat adds an intensity to the game, so make sure they feel that. Here are some tips for fast-paced and efficient combat. The first one is group initiative. If you have similar enemies like bandits or wolves, just roll for them once and have them all go at the same time. But if there's a bandit leader or alpha wolf of some kind, roll initiative for them separately and give them a cool ability so they feel more threatening and different. And if this was a combat you were prepared for, you can pre-roll the initiatives for your enemies, so that's just one less thing you have to worry about. Second tip is improvise damage. Sometimes your players are going to come up with some crazy stuff they do, and you're going to have to figure out how much damage it dealt. A simple way to figure it out is to think about 2 things. One, how much damage can their character normally do with an attack roll? And second is when you ask them to roll for this thing, how high was the DC that you set for the thing they did? If it wasn't that difficult, I might just have them roll the same dice they already would for their normal damage, and this would just be a really cool way that they flavored it. Or if it was a really high DC, add some damage to it. So if a character can normally do 1d6 plus 3 damage, and they succeed on this check, maybe now it's 2d6 plus 3. There's also an improvised damage chart on the back of the Dungeon Master screen that can help too, but just come up with something that feels right. The third tip here is a big one, and this one definitely could be its own video, but improvising and balancing your combat on the fly. Balancing a combat encounter just right can be a really hard thing to do. So if you're in the middle of combat and you feel like you over or underdid it, don't be afraid to tweak stuff on the fly. If you feel like you messed up and made things way too hard, scale some things back. Have them have less health or just have them make worse decisions. But if your players are killing it and this was supposed to be a really threatening encounter, don't be afraid to have reinforcements run in or an ability the boss has been holding on to is finally revealed. Again, this is going to be one of those things you have to really feel out as the DM, and over time you'll get better at balancing encounters and you'll have to do this less and less. Number 4, social encounters. Your players are going to come across lots of things to talk to in this game, and you are all of them. All you need to play these NPCs is a name, how they talk, and a quirk. It's easy enough to name an NPC that you know your players will meet, but also have a list of extra NPC names, both male and female, for NPCs that you have to create on the fly. The second thing is you need to talk different when you play these NPCs. Now this doesn't have to be a full-blown accent, but your players need to be able to tell if it's you talking to them or the NPC. Or especially when it's 2 NPCs in the same room as them, they need to be able to tell the difference. An example of this with no accent would be something like your emotions or facial expressions. A body position, maybe lowering your voice. Or sit a certain way and carry yourself differently. You can exaggerate an emotion or maybe avoid eye contact. Or have a certain posture and make hand gestures. So you don't have to have an accent, although I would recommend trying some out. But don't be afraid to embrace this whole thing and put yourself out there. It'll let your players feel comfortable doing the same. Now you might feel weird at first doing this, but again, you're the leader of the group, and if you want your players to be able to do the same, you need to show them that it's okay. And the third thing is some sort of personality quirk or flaw. I have some random role tables that I use for this, and if there's enough interest in NPC creation, then I'll do a whole video on it. So here's an example. Your players are walking through town and they want to talk to some random guard that you don't have made. Behind my DM screen, I have a list of pre-made NPCs just for this case. So here's one that I literally pulled off my list. I'd look down and I'd see Todrick, polite, one eye. And that's all I'd need. So I'd close one eye and start talking very politely and maybe with a softer voice. Maybe Todrick lost his eye in battle and ever since then he's became much more polite. Or what if instead your players wanted to go talk to a potion salesman? Now Todrick's a one-eyed potion salesman that maybe lost his eye to a potion mixing mix-up. So for those more important NPCs, I usually have a small index card with their name on it and some bullet points of key information that they know, just so I have something to refer to for what that specific character would know. And a final coaching tip here is you don't have to literally talk out every single thing between an NPC and a player. You can shift into something called narration. So instead of having a long back and forth conversation, you could shift into you talking as the DM about what that NPC talks about. Number 5 is exploration. Now this is pretty much anything in your game that's not combat or a social encounter just gets lumped into this. There's also something I do a lot in this category called skill challenges, but that's a whole video. So here are some tips for travel and exploration at the most basic level. It could start getting really confusing if you think about your towns as certain miles apart from each other. So I think of these distances in terms of days worth of travel instead of miles. So when I think up maps for places, I distance them apart by how many days travel it would be. I think of most towns are about a day's travel from each other if all you did that day was travel. So if my players want to travel to the town to the north and then go to the cave that they found out about, sure. So that would be 1 day's travel to the town, they'd rest, and they'd travel to the cave and arrive just at nightfall. Perfect timing. Or you could have things be 2 days travel away and throw something at them in the middle while they're resting. Whatever you want. Now, if you want travel to be a more central focus of your game, maybe you can make something more advanced and complicated, but I try and keep things simple. So before the session, I think about what they might encounter on the road and if there's any story nuggets I can throw at them. This could be a hostile encounter of something that's been following them, or a strange old woman just leaving from the town where they're headed. Let travel in your game take as big or as small of a role as you want it to be, because if my players are headed towards a villain's lair, I want to make them feel like they earned it. But if they're backtracking through places they've already been, I might just run it as a fast travel where I give a quick narration and they're there. Number 6, resting. Now the player's handbook has the differences between a short and a long rest, but here are some tips on how I run them. Short rest for me are when you can just take a breather, lick your wounds, no sleep required. They take about 30 minutes, and I'm pretty generous at giving these out when the players want them. Long rests though are far different. You actually need sleep, and the benefits compared to a short rest are massive. So I am much more strict on giving these out unless the players are in a town. I hate when players are deep into a dungeon and right before the last encounter, they want to take a long rest. That would make no sense to take an 8-hour break and fall asleep in such a threatening situation. So unless there's a logical place that makes sense or they really prepare for it, I don't see it happening. And if they tried, there'd be consequences. I think if you're too easy at giving out long rests, it reduces the value of a short rest and can reduce the pacing and tension of these threatening encounters. My favorite thing to do with long and short rests though have nothing to do with mechanics. This is a unique time for your characters to be able to talk with each other. During a short rest, you can ask a simple question. Is there anything I'll talk about? And for a long rest, if 2 players stay up to keep watch, they can talk to each other. Your players might be hesitant at first to really open up and role play with each other like this, but over time it'll get easier. This is when you can give inspiration or even bonus experience for good role play. Number 7 is narration. This is yourself and the player's narration. For the players, kind of like what we just talked about, ask them for more. They make a killing blow on something, ask them that famous question, how do you want to do this? They do something really cool, ask them what they say in that moment to let them embellish. The more you get them to do this, the more comfortable they'll be doing it themselves. Now as for yourself, you'll be describing a lot of things. Towns, landscapes, people, monsters, everything. Make sure you realize you have a picture in your head, but you gotta get that across to the players. So if you need to, you can write some notes down the side to really paint that picture and wake up their imagination. And if the player's gonna be interacting with this, maybe have a little sketch of it on the side that you can show them so they can really see what's going on. And my final coaching tip here is to really embellish on what your players say they do. Really describe it. If it's a success, make it feel epic. And if it's a failure, make it feel humorous. All of this can really increase your players' immersion and let them really feel in your game. Number 8 is pacing. You want the pace of your game to feel right. Now this will change from moment to moment, but you don't want your game to drag on or feel so rushed your players are scrambling all the time. If things are going too slow, give them little reminders that time is passing, and if they keep wasting time, something bad might happen. You can throw down an hourglass timer to get them moving, or an hourglass timer. One of my favorite things to do is just roll a d20 behind the scenes and then write something down for no reason, and it doesn't mean anything, but the players freak out and they start moving. Number 9, running your game. My dungeon coach tip here is for you to coach your players. Really teach them this game so everyone's on the same page. Again, it's not you versus them, so go easy on them when it's appropriate. If they forgot to roll a die of damage or forgot something back in town and it doesn't screw up the game, let them do it. Now remind them to do it next time, but if this is something that really slows your game down or it's something they keep doing over and over again, then maybe not. Because it's also okay to be hard on them when appropriate. If they're making some crazy decisions and aren't careful or respecting the world, make them learn from it. That's a perfect time to teach them that their actions have consequences. If you gave them plenty of warning and foreshadowing and their actions really deserve it, don't be afraid to bring down some hard losses on them. Last thing here is your players will never do what you expect them to do. So just go with it. And at the end of every session, ask yourself, what happens now? Number 10, what physical resources do you need to play this game? I'll also have some links down in the description for some things that I use. You need somewhere to play, whether it's at your game store or in your house. You need a big enough table and chairs to fit everybody. You can also use music and ambiance in your game. This doesn't have to be fancy at all. You can play it off your phone or laptop or just get a Bluetooth speaker. The music that I use in my game is just a simple YouTube playlist. Use the keyword ambiance or battle music and you can find anything you need. This one's simple, but make sure you have some scratch paper and some note cards to be able to write stuff down on the fly, whether it's just stuff to remember or keeping track of combat. Now for some things that you might have to actually go buy. For sure, the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. You will definitely be using these. And you gotta have dice. All you really need are 3 sets of dice, so don't go too overboard. You gotta have a DM screen, whether you buy one yourself or just tape some folders together. And there's gonna be a whole video I have about what to put behind it. You're gonna need battle maps to draw on for combat. At first, I just used simple paper that I laminated. Or you can get some pretty nice ones that you can also find cheap online. And I talk about this in my first video, but you can also get the starter set, which is a great buy for new DMs. This one's a big one, but you need something to represent your players and enemies.
Here's some cheap options. You can use dice and move them around if you want, or if you're more hungry, you can get actual food. And if you use these for enemies, you can eat them when you're done. Some things I've personally used are gems. I used these for a while before I was able to get any miniatures, and they're a great option. They also come in larger sizes for bigger enemies, and if you want, you can also get these wooden tokens that you can easily find at a hobby store. And what I've also done is got some cardstock and just drew my own. There's also some things you can print off online if you're not a fan of drawing. Or if you want to step it up to miniatures, you can get some unpainted or pre-painted miniatures from D&D board games or even Magic the Gathering board games. And then there's the holy grail of painted miniatures. It's a whole nother hobby in itself, but you can really have some fun painting these things. And eventually you can amass an army of miniatures.
And what do your players need? Some character sheets and some dice. That's it. Now I know this might all seem like a lot, but trust me, DMing is way easier than you're making it out to be in your head, so just go for it. Make sure you saw the first parts of this video where I go over your campaign and your story. I'm going to continue making these DM videos as long as I see more demand for them. These 2 videos together should really give you an overall picture of what it means to be a Dungeon Master. I hope you learned something in this video, and if you did, smash that subscribe button and share this video with as many people as you can. It really helps grow our channel. I post videos every Saturday at 9 a.m. Now, like I said, I'll eventually have videos for each one of these points in this video, but I love your requests down in the comment section, and that heavily drives my future videos. And if you have any questions or you want help with your campaign ideas, I want to hear that too. So go get creative, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.